The night the rancher finally let another heartbeat share his bed, the wind had been screaming across the plains like it had a memory of its own. It rattled the shutters of the old ranch house and carried with it 10 years of dust, regret, and unanswered prayers. For a decade, that bed had been a place of silence, a cold stretch of mattress where grief lay heavier than any blanket. The man who slept there had learned how to survive without warmth, without comfort, without hope. He believed the past was buried as deep as the bones under his land. He was wrong. Some things do not stay buried, and when they return, they do not knock. They step straight into your life and change it forever. The ranch sat alone at the edge of the Wyoming plains, where the sky felt bigger than a man's sins and lonelier than his heart. Caleb Harland had built that ranch with his bare hands and a stubborn belief that hard work could fix anything. In his youth, he had been known as a man of few words and steady strength, the kind who showed love by fixing fences before sunrise and riding through storms to bring cattle home. When he married Ruth, he believed he had been rewarded for every hardship that came before. She was gentle where he was rough, hopeful where he was cautious. For a few short years, the ranch felt alive. Laughter echoed through the halls. Lamps burned late into the night. And Caleb slept like a man who believed tomorrow was promised. Then sickness came quietly, the way it often does, slipping into their lives like a shadow at dusk. Ruth faded season by season, her strength thinning, while Caleb stood helpless beside her bed, bargaining with God in whispers he never meant anyone to hear. When she died, the world did not stop turning, but something inside Caleb did. He buried her on a small hill overlooking the ranch, where the grass grew soft and the sunsets burned gold and red. After that, he slept alone, night after night, year after year. Not because he wanted to, but because he did not know how to let anyone close without feeling like he was betraying the woman who had trusted him with her heart. 10 years passed that way. The ranch prospered, but the man withered. Caleb woke before dawn, worked until his hands shook, and returned to a house that felt more like a monument than a home. He spoke to his horses more than he spoke to people. Town folks respected him, but they also pitied him, whispering about the way he kept to himself, the way his eyes seemed permanently fixed on something far away. He told himself this was enough. Pain, after all, was familiar. Loneliness had become routine, and routine felt safer than hope. The letter arrived in early spring, its edges worn from travel. The handwriting stopped him cold. It belonged to Ruth's sister, Eleanor. He had not seen her since the funeral, not since she stood beside him in black, her face pale, and her eyes filled with the same disbelief that hollowed him out. Over the years, he had heard rumors of her life drifting apart from the family, of choices that did not sit well with polite society. He folded the letter once, then twice, before finally reading it. Eleanor was coming west. She had nowhere else to go. Caleb felt something twist at his chest that was not quite anger and not quite fear. Eleanor had always been different from Ruth. Where Ruth was soft-spoken, Eleanor was sharp-edged. Where Ruth sought peace, Eleanor chased survival. Still, she was family, and the land had taught Caleb one thing above all else. You did not turn your back on those who needed you. He prepared the guest room and told himself that was all it would be. A temporary kindness. A closed door between past and present. When Eleanor arrived, she did not look like the woman he remembered. Life had carved lines into her face and fire into her eyes. Her clothes were worn, her posture defensive, as though she expected the world to strike her at any moment. She stood on the porch with a single suitcase, staring at the ranch like it was both refuge and threat. Caleb nodded, took the bag, and led her inside without asking questions. The house felt smaller the moment she stepped in, as if the walls themselves remembered what they had once held. At first, They moved around each other carefully, like strangers sharing a fragile truce. Eleanor helped with chores, cooked meals that reminded Caleb painfully of Ruth, and kept her distance in the evenings. But nights on the plains are long, and silence has a way of pulling truth out of people. Slowly, Eleanor began to speak of the years she had lost, of mistakes made in desperation, of running from one disappointment to another. She carried shame like a second skin, and Caleb recognized it instantly. It mirrored his own. One stormy night, when the wind howled louder than usual and the power failed, everything changed. The house plunged into darkness, lit only by the weak glow of a single lantern. Eleanor's composure cracked. The storm dragged memories out of her, memories of nights when safety was a luxury she could not afford. She trembled, not from the cold, but from fear she had never learned to outrun. Caleb watched her struggle, and felt something break open inside him. He realized that grief had taught him how to endure pain, but not how to ease it in others. When Eleanor admitted she could not sleep alone that night, the words fell heavy between them. Caleb hesitated, not because he did not care, but because the past stood like a wall between them. Still, he saw the fear in her eyes, raw and honest. He nodded and led her to his room, a space untouched by another soul for 10 long years. He lay on the edge of the bed, rigid and awake, while Eleanor curled up on the other side, clutching the blankets like a lifeline. Nothing improper happened that night. No lines were crossed. And yet, everything changed. The shared silence felt different. The room no longer echoed. Caleb realized he was not alone with his memories anymore. He was sharing space with another wounded soul, and that closeness stirred something he had buried deep. Guilt followed close behind. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the idea that comfort did not always mean betrayal. Days passed, and the unspoken tension grew. Eleanor grew stronger, steadier. Caleb found himself watching her laugh at small things, noticing how resilience had shaped her into someone both fragile and fierce. He fought his feelings, reminding himself of Ruth, of loyalty, of the lines that should not be crossed. But grief is not a straight road, and healing rarely follows rules. The night Eleanor returned to his bed was not born of desire, but of truth. She told him she could not keep pretending she was unafraid, that sleeping alone reopened wounds she was not yet strong enough to face. Caleb listened, his heart pounding, and realized that love did not vanish when someone died. It transformed. It taught lessons. It made room for compassion without erasing memory. When Eleanor lay beside him again, the loneliness that had defined a decade of his life finally loosened its grip. He understood then that healing was not about replacing the past, but about allowing the future to breathe. He did not forget Ruth. He honored her by choosing life instead of endless mourning. Over time, the ranch changed. Laughter returned, not as an echo of what once was, but as something new. Eleanor found purpose in the land, and Caleb found himself opening doors he had sealed shut. Together, they faced judgment from the town, whispers carried on the same wind that once sang of sorrow. But the rancher who had slept alone for 10 years had learned something powerful. Other people's opinions weighed less than the truth in his heart. In the end, Caleb stood once more on the hill where Ruth was buried, Eleanor beside him. He felt peace instead of pain, gratitude instead of guilt. Life had not turned out the way he planned, but it had taught him that redemption often comes in unexpected forms, through people who understand your brokenness because they carry their own. As the sun set over the plains, painting the sky with hope, Caleb knew that love was not finite. It did not end with loss. It evolved, it healed, and it gave second chances to those brave enough to accept them. And that is the heart of the Wild West legend you've just heard. A story about grief, courage, and the quiet strength it takes to open your heart again after years of solitude. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that it is never too late to heal, never too late to hope, then take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Legends of the Wild West. Because sometimes, the greatest battles are not fought with guns or fists, but with the choice to let love back in. The morning after Eleanor first truly stayed, the ranch woke under a pale sky streaked with thin clouds, as if the land itself was unsure what came next. Caleb rose before dawn out of habit, but something inside him had shifted. The silence no longer felt like punishment. It felt like a pause before a new chapter. As he stepped onto the porch, the air smelled of wet earth and possibility, and for the first time in 10 years, he did not feel the urge to outrun his own thoughts. Eleanor changed too, though more quietly. She moved through the house with less caution, as if the walls no longer judged her. The ranch gave her structure, and the rhythm of work steadied her breathing. She learned the names of the horses, the temper of the land, the way the wind warned of coming storms. In the evenings, she sat at the table where Ruth once sat, not as a replacement, but as someone carving her own place into the story of the house. Yet peace rarely comes without resistance. Word traveled fast in a small town, and curiosity soon turned sharp. Eyes lingered when Caleb rode into town with Eleanor beside him. Whispers followed them down wooden sidewalks. Some carried pity, others condemnation. Caleb felt old anger rise in his chest, but he no longer fed it. He had spent too many years imprisoned by grief to let judgment cage him now. Eleanor felt the weight of it more heavily. She had lived her life under other people's verdicts before, and the fear of becoming a burden gnawed at her. One night, after a long day of work, she stood alone on the porch, staring into the dark plains, convinced she did not belong anywhere. Caleb saw her there, shoulders tense, and understood that healing was not a straight line. It bent, it faltered, and sometimes it felt like starting over. The turning point came when the ranch faced real danger. A late-season drought tightened its grip, shrinking water sources and pushing cattle to the edge. Caleb worked himself past exhaustion, driven by an old belief that survival depended on solitary strength. Eleanor watched him burn himself down, just as she had watched herself do years before. She stepped in, not with force, but with resolve, organizing help, making hard calls, reminding Caleb that partnership was not weakness. As the drought broke under a sudden, violent storm, Caleb realized how far he had come. He no longer carried the weight alone. Eleanor stood beside him in the rain, mud on her boots, determination in her eyes. In that moment, the ranch felt whole again, not because the past had been erased, but because the future had been claimed. That night, Caleb dreamed of Ruth for the first time in years. She did not accuse him. She smiled, peaceful, as if to say that love did not end, it trusted. When he woke, he felt lighter, freed from the guilt he had worn like chains. He understood that honoring the dead did not mean abandoning the living. Eleanor, too, faced her reckoning. Letters arrived from the east, remnants of a life she no longer wanted to run from. She chose to confront them, to close doors instead of fleeing through them. Caleb supported her without trying to save her, knowing now that true love allowed space for strength. Seasons turned, and the ranch transformed. Fences were rebuilt. Fields recovered. Laughter found its way into the evenings, not loud or careless, but real. Caleb and Eleanor's bond deepened slowly, grounded in respect and shared scars. It was not a love born of convenience, but of understanding. When they finally stood together before the town, unashamed and unwavering, the whispers faded. Some people never understood. Others quietly admired the courage it took to begin again in the same place where life once fell apart. Caleb often returned to the hill where Ruth rested, no longer alone. He spoke of gratitude instead of sorrow, of lessons learned instead of losses endured. He had slept alone for 10 years, believing solitude was his penance. Now he knew it had only been preparation. The Wild West was never just about outlaws and gunfights. It was about endurance, redemption, and the quiet bravery it takes to choose love after loss. And if this story reminds you that your past does not define your future, that healing is possible even after years of loneliness, then let it stay with you. Like this video. Subscribe to Legends of the Wild West. And remember, no matter how long the night lasts, dawn still comes for those willing to wait for it.